Picking up where we left off, we're talking about significant figures when we're doing different mathematical operations. So we had just looked at this slide, I believe, and learned how to do addition and subtraction. Here's another example, and just something I want to point out. When you're adding and subtracting, the answer can end up having a completely different number of significant figures than anything that you started with. That's because we're not considering number of significant figures, we're looking at number of decimal places. I knew I forgot something. I forgot my calculator today. Darn. Okay, I've got my cell phone. So here we have two numbers, and if we subtract them, get out the calculator or the app on the cell phone, 28.02 minus 27.99, and the calculator gives us the answer 0.03. This is subtraction, so we need to look at number of decimal places. This number has 2 decimal places. This number also has 2 decimal places. So our final answer should have 2 decimal places. In this case, we don't need to round or do anything else. What the calculator gave us is fine. We started out with 4 significant figures here and 4 significant figures here. And how many do we have in our answer? Only 1. And that's okay, it happens. Any questions? You're gonna, for the Monday people got some practice with sig figs yesterday, and the rest of you will get it on Wednesday and Friday. So let's just do a little bit of practice here. So here's this, little exercise. So we're just gonna do it on our calculators first, and then write down what the calculator says. Then we'll think about significant figures. This is not math class where we want you to do the multiplication or the adding or stuff in your head. If you're good at that, that's fine, but we just want you to get the right answer. My calculator is telling me 7.588. Anybody else get that? Okay, good. Here we only have adding and subtracting. We're going to count number of decimal places. So we're looking for the one with the fewest decimal places. So this one has 2, and this one has 3, and this one has 4. I'm not counting significant figures. I'm counting places after the decimal point. This only has 1 place after the decimal point. So that tells me I should round my answer to 1 place after the decimal point. So I look at the next number, it's 5 or larger, so I round up and I say this is 7.6. Let's look at that stacked up. 2.18, 5.621, 1.5870, and 1.8. Now this is mixed adding and subtracting, so you would not stack it like this to do it without a calculator. But we're just stacking it so we can look at the significant figures. And then I'm going to write the answer down here. Because counting decimal places works for some people, but it doesn't make sense to everybody. Another way is by stacking, and we're trying to identify which is the uncertain digit. It's always the last significant figure. So in the first number, the last significant figure is the 8. And here it's the 1. Here we have a trailing 0, and those guys can be confusing. There's a written decimal point. This is a significant figure. And then down here, it's the 8. Okay, so I'm just looking at where's the last sig fig. And then I'm going to go from left to right and look at the columns. There's no underlined digits here. This column has an underlined digit. That's where my answer is going to cut off. So I'm going to draw a vertical line after the first column that has an uncertain digit in it. And that's going to have, that digit in the answer is going to be uncertain, and so that's why we round to 7.6. Okay, I know that a lot of you are still real fuzzy on this, and that's okay. I can't continue on this particular topic until everybody's clear on it, but that's what lab is for, okay? So if this isn't making sense to you yet, keep trying and keep asking me questions. I can explain it a whole bunch of different ways, but we just don't have too much time. So this last one here, 7.86, I'm just doing this on my calculator, 7.876, it helps to get the number right, minus 0.56 plus 123.792. Calculator says 131.108. This is adding and subtracting. I'm looking at how many decimal places. Here we've got 3 decimal places, and 2 decimal places, and 3 decimal places. This number here has the fewest number of decimal places. So that's going to limit my answer to 2 decimal places. So this is going to be 131.11 because the 8 causes the 0 to round up to a 1. Any questions? What if we have multiplication division mixed with addition subtraction? Then we need to be a little more careful. So here's some guidelines. We have to consider order of operations. If there's any parentheses, do those first. Determine the correct number of sig figs in the intermediate answer, but do so without rounding. We don't want to round until we get to the very end. Do the remaining steps, and then we're going to round the final answer, and we have to consider any intermediate answers. And that probably doesn't make much sense, but hopefully it'll become clear when we do a couple of examples. So here we have an example. We have a number multiplied by this quantity, one number subtracted another, okay? We need to do what's in the parentheses first, and then compare and then multiply. So on my calculator, I'm going to do 782.3 minus 451.88. I'm going to press the equal sign, and I'm actually going to write that down. That is equal to 330.42. That's what my calculator gives me. If this was my final answer, though, how should I round it? Just to the first decimal point place, because this number only has 1 decimal place, this has 2. So the 4, the 10th place, is the last significant figure. I don't want to round it off yet, though, because I'm not done with my calculation. Now I'm going to multiply 3.897 and I get a big mess. I'm going to write it up here. 1287.64674. Way too many digits. This number came from multiplying these 2 quantities. How many significant figures in 3.897? 4. It should be easy. There weren't any confusing zeros. How about in this number here, 330.4 that I underlined, 2. The underline means this is the last significant figure. I'm not going to count the 2. So this also has 4 significant figures. So 4 and 4, they're both the smallest. So that means I keep 4 sig figs in this number. Here's the 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to keep to the 1's place. I look at the 6. That tells me I need to round up, and so my answer is 1288. Especially if you've got some work and things are getting kind of messy, put a box around your final answer to make it jump out. Any questions? Okay, that's a good question. What does it depend on, the sig figs where? Well, when we subtract, we use a different rule. So we have to look at the result of the subtraction and apply the subtracting rule. So we identify that this number has 4 significant figures. Then we've got this number multiplied by that number. And they both have 4 significant figures, and so then we end up with 4 in the product. This 2 might be confusing. We're not going to drop the 2 off, because that can sometimes affect the final answer in a significant way. Sometimes it doesn't. But just as general practice, we don't round intermediate values because we can get this extra error that we don't want. Did that answer your question? Any other questions? Let's look at this one. Here we have a division that's in parentheses. You have to do that first. Do you remember order of operations, PEMDAS, or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. So we have to do the division first here because it's in the parentheses. So 4.58, and I put that in wrong, 4.58 divided by 1.239 equals. I'm going to write that down, and I'm also leaving it in my calculator, 3.69652946. Wow, lots of digits. Let's identify the last significant figure. Well, we're dividing. We're counting number of significant figures now. 3 significant figures, 4 significant figures. So this result should only have 3 significant figures. That would round right there. So this result has 3 sig figs. I'm now going to subtract the 0.578. I've got this number already in my calculator. I'm just going to press minus 0.578 equals, and I get another mess, 11852,946. Here I'm looking at subtracting. When I'm looking at subtracting, I'm not looking at significant figures. I'm looking at number of decimal places. So this one should be rounded here, but we're not rounding because we're going to wait till the end. But that would give it 2 decimal places, right? So that one's got 2 decimal places. And how many decimal places does this one have? 3. 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places. So my answer should have how many? 2 decimal places. So that'll be the second one. Bless you. And so that's 3.12. Any questions? There's some practice on this in the worksheet that we're going to do this week. Now, I will tell you, oh, question?
Okay, so when we multiply, so we're looking at the significant numbers, right? And when we subtract, it's just after the decimal?
Right. So when you're subtracting, you're looking at how many decimal places. Yeah.
It's just subtracting, or is it adding to it?
Adding and subtracting are the same rule.
Okay.
Multiplying and dividing are the same rule because they're opposites of each other. Yeah. And in lab, I'll show you another way to look at it. So if this isn't making sense to you, please come and talk to me, okay? Once you see it, you'll say, oh, that's easy. Until that time, no, it's not easy, okay? But you just need to persist and keep trying until it clicks, okay? So what's very important is that you learn the rules for multiplying, dividing, and for adding and subtracting. What's less important is that you learn what to do when they're all mixed up, because we're not actually going to encounter that very often. So you can definitely pass the class without ever figuring out the combined operations. but you do need to understand the individual operations, okay?